Okay, it's good. Good to see you all. So I just wanted to say that next Sunday we will not have class because I'm going to be away for a few days. We're actually leaving on Saturday night late, so no class next Sunday. And there's a question about the following Sunday. December 1st, which is Thanksgiving weekend. There's no Hebrew school. I'll be here for Minyan, so I'll be here anyway. When I send out the email with the recording, I'll ask if people are going to be around to have class on December 1st. So just reply to that to let me know if we'll have class then.
You already asked in an email.
I asked
That was
about
for the,
Bible
uh,
class.
Oh,
But
same.
I don't remember, and not everybody responded to that either, but I think we'll have it. But December 1st, so we'll see. Okay. Um, let's see. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And share screen, and here we are. Okay. So we left off at this red S, and that's about as big as I can make it. And so we're talking about, who's responsible for building a partition, what kind of property is it, what kind of shared property is it. Now we get to a different circumstance. Abaye is a rabbi of the Talmudic period, fourth generation of rabbis. If there were two houses on two sides of a public domain, this one, the owner of one of the houses, must build a fence for his roof, for half his roof, and that one, the owner of the other house, must build a fence for half his roof. They must position the fences so that one fence is not opposite the other fence, and each one must add to his fence a little beyond the midway point so that each one should not be able to see the activity on the other's roof. So there's a picture below to see exactly. So here are the two houses. You have the public thoroughfare, public domain in between, like this. So this is how you build the fences on the house. Now you're supposed to have a parapet around the roof. If people are intended to be on a roof, you have to have some kind of guardrail so that people don't fall off. This is about so people can't see what's going on somebody else's rooftop, right? So it's a thing today to have rooftop bars and restaurants and things like that. So you want to allow for privacy. So this is the fence that this house has to build, and this fence over here. So this way, if you're standing over here on this house, I don't know, you can't see where I'm pointing out to, then what you're seeing is the fence over here. And you're supposed to build a little bit further out. That's what the red perforated lines are, building a little further out to ensure privacy, right? The section of the fence that is indicated with the broken lines is the supplement that each party must add to his fence beyond the midway point. Okay, so you have to add like another half of the length to ensure the privacy on the roof. Okay, so the Gemara asks, why discuss specifically the case of two houses on opposite sides of a public domain, considering that the same halacha should apply even if the two houses are separated by a private domain? Right, so what does the domain have to do with it? The fact is that it's two houses that could be looking over at each other. What difference does the domain make in between the houses? The Gemara answers, it was necessary for Abaye to mention a public domain, lest you say that one neighbor can say to the other, ultimately you need to conceal yourself from people in the public domain. Since in any event you have to build a fence across your entire roof, you cannot compel me to build a fence on my roof. So that's the idea of building. I mentioned before, the Torah says you have to have a fence around your roof, but it doesn't say how high the fence has to be. It just has to be enough to prevent somebody from falling off accidentally. But does that have to do with the privacy of the privacy factor of this idea? So ultimately, you need to conceal yourself from people in the public domain. Since in any event, you have to build a fence across your entire roof, you cannot compel me to build a fence on my roof. So in other words, Abaye might be teaching this specifically about the public domain because of the extra caution about public domain. To counter this, Abaye teaches us that this is not so, because the second homeowner can say to the first in response, the public can see me only during the day when pedestrians pass by, but they cannot see me at night. You, by contrast, can see me both during the day and at night. Okay, so that in other words, that's why Abaye is teaching this, that, yeah, sure, you have to have a fence on your roof, but it's not high enough to prevent you seeing me at night. So you have to be compelled, or Abaye teaches that people have to be compelled to build their fence this way, so even at night people can't see. Alternatively, he can say, the public can see me from the street only when I'm standing, but they cannot see me when I'm sitting. You, by contrast, can see me both when I'm standing and when I'm sitting. And furthermore, the public can see me only when they look specifically at me, but they can't see me when they do not look specifically at me, since the average person doesn't look up to see what's happening on the roofs. You, by contrast, can see me in any case because you live opposite me. So the public domain is, people down below, it's only if you're looking up that you can see what's happening on a roof. But if you're on the roof on the facing house, and those who came in, this is what we're talking about here. If you're on the roof of the other house, you can see the other person all the time. So that's why you need privacy. The master, that is Abaye, said above, this one, the owner of one of the houses, must build a fence for half his roof, and that one, the owner of the other house, must build a fence for half his roof. They must position the fences so that one fence is not opposite the other fence, and each one must add to his fence a little beyond the midway point, right? That's what we just said. They're just quoting it again, this statement here. They're just quoting it again. The Gemara asks, isn't it obvious that each one must make a fence for half his roof? Like, in other words, if you're going to compel people to build a fence for privacy, that would be the way to do it with the least amount cost and least material, right? So that this way, this fence over here and then this fence over here, people can't see beyond if they're looking straight ahead. Okay, isn't it obvious? So the Gemara answers, no, it's necessary. I just need to readjust something on my screen. Okay. No, it is necessary in a case where one of them went ahead on his own and constructed a fence on half of his roof, lest you say that the other can say to him, take from me compensation for the expenditure, and you build the entire fence. And in that way, we will not invade one another's privacy. So in other words, you do the half and half this way so that people know that if one starts building a fence, the other guy can't say, you know what, just build the fence on your property the whole way and I'll pay you back. Therefore, Abaye teaches us that the neighbor who built the fence for half his roof can say to him, what's the reason you don't want to build a fence? It's because the added weight will damage your house's foundation. My foundation too will be damaged if I continue to build on my roof. So in other words, that's why they got to do half a roof, just to be sure that the house doesn't fall down. And that this way, both people are involved in the process. Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says, if one's roof is adjacent to his neighbor's courtyard, he must build a fence on the roof 4 cubits high, so that he will not be able to see into his neighbor's courtyard. but he's not required to build a fence between one roof and another roof. And Rav Nachman himself says he's not required to build a fence 4 cubits high on the roof, but he is required to build a partition that is 10 handbreadths high. So if we're talking about roof versus courtyard down below, then you only either you need a 4 cubit high fence, which is 6 feet high, or you need a 10 handbreadth high fence. 10 handbreadths. So if this is a handbreadth, I don't know, is that 3 inches? So 30 inches, that's 2.5 feet, something like that. So now they're going to discuss that. How high does this have to be? The Gemara asks, for what purpose, according to Rav Nachman, does the neighbor have to build such a partition? If it's to prevent damage caused by exposure to the sight of others, that is privacy, we require a partition of 4 cubits. It's got to be 6 feet. That's what we discussed above. That 6 feet is the minimum to ensure privacy. If it's to catch the neighbor as a thief, that is to set a boundary between the two properties so that any trespass will be construed as attempted theft, a mere partition of pegs suffices, right? If you just want to keep somebody out, you just need a partition. And if it's to prevent kid goats and lambs from crossing from one roof to the other, a low partition that is high enough so that the goat or lamb will not be able to leap headlong from one roof to the other suffices. So what's the reason for the partition? Is it privacy? Is it theft? Is it animals? The Gemara answers, actually it's built to catch the neighbor as a thief. With a partition of pegs, he can give an excuse and say that he was merely stretching himself. But with a partition of 10 handbreadths, he can't give such an excuse. So I'm looking to see if there's a picture or something. Right, so just he can give an excuse. He can give an excuse that he dropped an item in the other's property, or that owing to the insignificance of the barrier, he didn't realize it was a boundary marker, or that he simply did not pay attention and entered the area inadvertently. So pegs might not be good enough. So you have to figure out the kind of partition that's good enough to cover all eventualities, that is, all reasons why you might need to build a fence, whether it's to protect against theft, animals, or privacy.
Any way of knowing if it was common for animals to be up on the roof? How do you get them on the roof?
Right. So I don't know. That's a good question. It's possible that people could have things growing on the roof. And you know, there are those kinds of roofs, like people have gardens on rooftops now. It's supposed to be like an environmental thing to do. But I think back in the day, it was common to have a roof like that it would be like a dirt roof and you can grow things on the roof and you could put your animals there to on it. So I don't know, there's no picture here, and you could Google, you know, was it common to have animals on your roof? So because I don't know enough about ancient architecture to answer the question. Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says, if one's roof is adjacent to his neighbor's courtyard, he must build a fence on the roof 4 cubits high, so that. We did this. The Gemara raises an objection to the opinion of Rav Nachman from a Baraita. If his courtyard was higher than the other's roof, he's not required to attend to it. What? Is it not teaching that he's not required to attend to it at all? That is, that he need not build any type of fence? The Gemara answers no. It means that he's not required to attend to building a partition of 4 cubits, but he must attend to building a partition of 10 handbreadths, as maintained by Rav Nachman. So I can't imagine what kind of neighborhood that is, that the courtyard might be higher than the roof, but still, for the roof, you need to have, in this situation, a partition at least 10 handbreadths high. Okay, and it was stated that Amoraim, that is rabbis of the Gemara period, disagree about the following case. If there are two adjoining courtyards, one higher than the other, Rav Huna says that the owner of the lower courtyard builds the wall separating the courtyards from his level and upward. And the owner of the upper courtyard builds the wall from his level and upward. And Rav Chisda says the owner of the upper courtyard assists the owner of the lower courtyard and builds from below, even including that part of the wall which is opposite the lower courtyard. I just want to, and here's a picture. Okay, so two courtyards, one higher than the other. Rashi states that the owner of the lower courtyard builds wall A at his own expense and contributes to the construction of wall B, which he builds together with the owner of the upper courtyard on top of wall A. Okay, so that's how this would work with adjoining courtyards, one bit being higher than the other. Okay. The Gemara notes that it's taught in a Braita in accordance with the opinion of Rav Chisda. If there are two adjoining courtyards, one higher than the other, the owner of the upper courtyard cannot say, I will build from my level and upward, but rather he assists the owner of the lower courtyard and builds from below. And if his courtyard is higher than the roof of his neighbor, he is not required to attend to it. The owner of the upper courtyard need not build a partition because people do not ordinarily use their roofs. So now I'm just confused. I don't know if people ordinarily use their roofs or not. And what was the point of how we began today about people needing to build privacy fences on roofs if people aren't using their roofs? So I don't get this editorial comment because that's what it is. It's written in regular font, not bolded. So this is the Steinsaltz adding this, and I'm not sure why he said that. Okay, so on to a different topic. It is related that two people were living in a two-story building. One was living in the upper story, and one was living in the lower one. The lower story began to collapse, its walls sinking into the ground to the point that it was no longer fit for dwelling. The owner of the lower story said to the owner of the upper story, "Come and let us demolish the whole building and rebuild it together." The owner of the upper story said to him, "I'm living comfortably, and I'm under no obligation to rebuild your residence." Right, so now we don't know who owns the building. We just know that somebody's living in the lower story and somebody's living in the upper story. So the lower story collapses, and the lower story says to the upper, "Hey, let's rebuild the whole building." And the upper story says, "No, thanks. My upper story is fine." The owner of the lower story said to him, "I will dismantle the structure and rebuild it." The owner of the upper story said, "But then I'll have no place to live while you're renovating." The owner of the lower story said to him, "I'll rent a place for you to live during the duration." The owner of the upper story said to him, "I don't want to bother with moving." The owner of the lower story said to him, "But I can't live in my apartment in this condition, as the walls have sunk into the ground." The owner of the upper story said to him, "That's not my problem." Crawl on your stomach to go in and crawl on your stomach to go out. Now, I have a problem with this, in that why is this upper story neighbor being such being so unneighborly and so unsympathetic? I can understand monetarily and legally that he doesn't have to help, but there ethically, it would be the nice thing to do to help. And in the long run, maybe his upper story is going to collapse anyway because it's the same building. So it's just problematic to me, the course of this story or this conversation, that how stubborn the upper story resident is being. Rav Chama said, by law, the owner of the upper story can prevent his downstairs neighbor from rebuilding. And there's halacha on this. By law, the neighbor can prevent. If two people are living in a two-story building, one in the upper story, one in the lower one, and the beams supporting the upper story begin to sink, the owner of the lower story cannot force his upstairs neighbor to demolish the whole building and rebuild it, even if he offers to pay for the entire project and cover the rent of his neighbor during the time of reconstruction. This halacha applies even if the upstairs neighbor is not living in the upper story, but rather using it to store wood or straw. It applies only if the beams do not sink more than 10 handbreadths below the ground. But if they sink more than 10 handbreadths, the owner of the lower story can demolish the structure and rebuild it at his own expense. According to the Ramah, if the house sinks into the ground so that the height of the lower story is less than 10 handbreadths, the owner of the lower story can force his upstairs neighbor to vacate the building so that it can be rebuilt, and he can also require him to contribute to the construction costs. Okay, so that's the law here. Okay, but Rav Chama said by law, the owner of the upper story can prevent his downstairs neighbor from rebuilding. The Gemara comments, and this statement applies only when the beams supporting the second story have not reached lower than 10 handbreadths from the ground. But if those beams have reached lower than 10 handbreadths from the ground, the owner of the lower story can say to the owner of the upper story, below 10 handbreadths is my domain, and my domain is not bound to you to support your residence. The Gemara further comments in this statement that the owner of the upper story can prevent his downstairs neighbor from rebuilding applies only when they did not stipulate with each other that if the house sinks, they will rebuild the house anew. But if they made such a stipulation with each other, they must dismantle the house and rebuild it. So it has to be built into the contract. And as we always learn, better to have things in writing. And if you don't have things in writing, then you have to rely on these basic principles. And so 10 handbreadths high, like I said, if that's 2.5 feet, that's pretty low to be able to say that that's the minimum height required to be able to live in somewhere. And I would say 10 handbreadths. Again, if a handbreadth is 3 inches, 10 of them 30 inches, 2.5 feet high, it's quite uncomfortable to walk around stooped like that in your dwelling to be able to, and I think it's a matter of crawling in order to be able to stay in a house like that. The Gemara asks, and if they made a stipulation with each other, to what extent must the ceiling of the lower story drop before they implement the stipulation? The sages said before Rabbah in the name of Mar Zutra, son of Rav Nachman, who said in the name of Rav Nachman, like that which we learned in a Mishnah later on in Baba Kama, if one takes upon himself to build a house for another person without stipulating its dimensions, its height must be equal to the sum of half its length and half its width. Rabbah said to them, did I not tell you not to hang empty pictures on Rav Nachman, meaning not to attribute foolish opinions to him? Rather, this is what Rav Nachman said, as people normally live and no more. So I would think the minimum height is 8 feet now. I think that, isn't that what, is it 8 feet? Yeah, I think it's 8 feet high is what your ceiling is. And how much space is that? Rav Huna, son of Rav Yehoshua, said, the ceiling of the lower story must be high enough so that one could bring in bundles of reeds of the type made in Machoza and be able to turn around. So the type of reeds in Machoza, let's see, that's the halacha. Let's look at notes to see that. Here we go. Bundles of reeds of Machoza. The Ramah writes that this measurement was specific to the location where the statement was performed, and that every place has to base the measurement on large items that are ordinarily carried into homes. So it has to be tall enough that if you're going to carry a large item, that you don't have to stoop. You have to be able to bring it in and turn around without a problem. That's the minimum height. And they mentioned this, the reeds of the type made in Machoza, because people in Babylonia knew what they were talking about. Okay, I don't know if we were. I'm trying to think of a related idea here, and I can't think of something right now. but I don't know. If somebody say I like a colonial style house, maybe people understand what a colonial house is, um, or a ranch house. Yeah, so it's kind of like saying the same thing, but it's not helping us with the height. I think the average height today for homes of rooms is 8 feet high. It's further related that a certain man built a wall outside the windows of his neighbor. The neighbor said to him, You are blocking the light with your wall and darkening my house. The one who built the wall said to him, I will seal your windows here and make new windows for you in your wall above the wall that I'm building. The neighbor said to him, By doing so, you will damage my wall. The one who built the wall said to him, I will demolish your wall until the level of the windows and rebuild it, and then I will make windows for you in the new part of the building above my wall. The neighbor said to him, A wall that is old at the bottom and new at the top will not endure. So, in other words, you got a neighbor building a wall across from windows. And again, it's not the privacy issue here. It's a matter of darkening your neighbor's house, and you're giving options to your neighbor to make amends, and they're not satisfactory. The one who built the wall said to him, I'll demolish the wall until the ground and entirely rebuild it, and then I'll make windows for you in it above my wall. The neighbor said to him, One new wall in an old house will not endure. The one who built the wall said to him, I'll demolish your entire house and put windows in a new building that I'll erect in its place. The neighbor said to him, But in the meantime, I'll have no place to live. The one who built the wall said to him, I'll rent a place for you to live. The neighbor said to him, I don't want to bother with moving. Rav Chama said, by law, the neighbor can prevent him from building the wall. So, in other words, if a neighbor is starting to build a wall that clearly is going to block your view or your light from your window in your house, then you can prevent your neighbor from building that. No matter what he offers you as compensation, you don't have to take that. You can just say, I don't want you to build the wall. The Gemara asks, this case is identical to that case. That is of the upper story, lower story, because they're giving the same kind of options in both cases. This case is identical to that case. This case is very similar to the previous case of the owner of the upper story who can prevent the owner of the lower story from rebuilding. Why do I need this additional case? The Gemara answers. This teaches us that even if he uses the house only for storing straw and wood, he can still maintain that blocking the light causes him damage and can prevent the neighbor from erecting the wall. Right? So even if you're using the upper story for storage, or even if you're using the house with the windows for storage, and you're not personally benefiting from the light coming into the house, you still have the right to say to the neighbor, don't build the wall or don't rebuild your lower story. The Gemara further relates, there were two brothers who divided their father's estate between them. One received a hall in his share, and one received a garden. So now just what the word for hall is. Rashi explains that this refers to a beautiful hall. The Aruch, which is like a medieval time dictionary of Aramaic, says it's a cave. I don't know how. So the estate, including acreage, could have a cave. Many early commentaries maintain that the structure under discussion is a well-lit portico that is completely open on one side. So I'm trying to figure out what the word aspelida. So there's language also, which is, there it is, aspelida. Some link this term to the Greek speladion, meaning a small cave. Others suggest it's connected to salis, or the genitive form salidos, meaning a store, a booth, or a place under a vault. So trying to figure out this word in Aramaic, which is coming from the Greek. Okay, so
but not a man cave, though, right? So
not a man cave, haha. Yes. So one received the hall in his share, one received the garden. The one who received the garden went and built a wall in front of the opening of the hall. His brother said to him, "You're blocking the light with your wall and darkening my house." The one who received the garden said to him, "I'm building on my property." Rav Chama said, by right, he said that to him, as it is permitted for him to build there. So, in this case, blocking the light of the Aspelida for sake of his garden, he's allowed to do that. Ravina said to Rav Ashi, "In what way is this different from that which is taught in a Baraita? If two brothers divided their father's estate between them, one of them taking a vineyard and the other one taking a grain field, the owner of the vineyard has the right to an area 4 cubits wide in the grain field for the purpose of working the vineyard, since it was on that condition that they divided the estate. Why in this case does the owner of the hall not have the right to make use of the light coming in from the garden?" Rav Ashi said to him, "There, the reason is that they made an assessment with each other with regard to the value of the fields, arranging for compensation if one received more than the other, and they took the work area into account." Ravina asked, "But what did they do here? Did they not make an assessment with each other? Are we dealing with fools that this one took the valuable hall and the other one took the much less valuable garden without making an assessment with each other?" Rav Ashi said to him, "Although they assessed with each other the value of the bricks, the beams, and the boards, they didn't assess with each other the value of the airspace. With regard to that, each one retained full rights to his respective airspace." The Gemara says, "And let the one who received the hall say to the other, 'Initially, you gave me a well-lit hall. Now you're making it into a small dark room.'" Rav Shimi Bar Ashi said, "He gave him only a place that's called a hall by name. That is, a place that is called a hall, even though it's no longer used that way." Rav Ashi continues, "Isn't it taught in a Baraita in a case of one who says to another, 'I'm selling you a beit core of dirt'?" So beit core is a measurement, and just a second, there's supposed to be background. Yeah. Beit core. A beit core is the space needed for the sowing of a core, or 30 seah of grain. The space required for the sowing of a seah is 2,500 square cubits. A beit core is therefore an area of 75,000 square cubits, which is approximately 18,750 square meters, which still doesn't help me in any way, but I think that's large. So I'm selling you a beit core of dirt. It becomes his even if it is only a letech, that is a half core, and the sale is not void because he sold him only a place that is called a beit core by name. The Gemara comments, and this ruling applies only as long as the land he is selling him is actually called a beit core. Similarly, if he says to him, "I'm selling you an orchard," it becomes his even if it lacks pomegranates, because he sold him only a place that is called an orchard by name. The Gemara comments, and this applies only as long as the land he is selling is actually called an orchard. And similarly, if he says to him, "I'm selling you a vineyard," it becomes his even if it lacks grapevines, because he sold him only a place that is called a vineyard by name. The Gemara comments, and this applies only as long as the land he is selling is actually called a vineyard. So maybe it's called a vineyard because at one time it was a vineyard and everybody knew it was a vineyard. Not sure how that could be. The Gemara rejects this argument. Are these cases comparable? There, the seller can say to the buyer, "I sold you only a place that is called that by name." Here, the one who received the hall can say to his brother, "I took this portion as my share on condition that I would live there the way our fathers lived there, and that you would not change that by blocking the light entering through the windows." With regard to Rav Chama's ruling that it is permitted for the brother who received the garden to build a wall in front of the hall, they said to him, that is Mar Yanuka and Mar Kashisha, sons of Rachista, said to Rav Ashi, "The sages of Nehardea," another town in Babylonia, follow their usual line of reasoning. As Rav Chama, who was from Nehardea, issued his ruling in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel, who was also from that city. As Rav Nachman says, that Shmuel says, in the case of brothers who divided their father's estate, they don't have a right of way against each other. Although the father would traverse the outer field from the inner field to access the public domain, the brother who received the inner field as an inheritance does not have the right to traverse his brother's outer field. Right, so it doesn't matter that at one time it was all one property. Now that it's divided into two separate properties, you don't have the right of way anymore. Shmuel continues, nor do they have the right of windows against each other. That is, the right to prevent the other from building a wall facing his windows. Nor do they have the right of ladders against each other. That is, the right to set up a ladder in the other's property in order to get to his own. Nor do they have the right of a water channel against each other. That is, the right to pass a water channel through the other's property. And be careful with these, since they are established halachot. Rava says the brothers do have all of the aforementioned rights. Okay, so now there's a disagreement among rabbis. Rav Chama agrees with Shmuel's opinion that each brother can do as he pleases on his own property without the other one preventing him from doing so. Since Rav Chama's rulings were mentioned, the Gemara cites another halachic ruling in his name. There was a certain promissory note inherited by orphans from their father, stating that somebody owed them money, against which a receipt was produced by the borrower, stating that the debt was already paid. Rav Chama said, we can't use the note to collect the debt on behalf of the orphans, nor can we tear it up. The Gemara explains, we cannot collect with the note because the receipt against it was produced by the borrower, and we can't tear the note up because perhaps when the orphans grow up, they'll bring proof that the receipt was forged and undermine it. Okay, so there's that idea. So these minor orphans, their father died. They inherit the IOU. That is, they inherit the loan statement that somebody owes their father money, and somebody else showed a receipt. So you don't let the orphans collect, but you don't also tear up their note, because maybe when they grow up, they'll be able to to hire a lawyer or something to research this and bring proof. Rav Acha, son of Rava, said to Ravina, what's the halacha? Ravina said to him, in all the cases in this discussion, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Chama, except for the case of the receipt, because we don't presume that the witnesses are liars. Since witnesses sign the receipt, the court trusts that the debt was paid, and they tear up the promissory note. Mar Zutra, son of Rav Mari, said, in this case as well, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Chama because the validity of the receipt is in doubt. As, if it is so that it's a valid receipt, the borrower should have produced it during their father's lifetime. And since he did not produce it at the proper time, we learn from this that he may have forged it. Even though this is not an absolute proof, it's sufficient reason not to tear up the promissory note. Right? So in other words, okay, so we're at the end of all this discussion here, conflicting opinions, conflicting properties, and it's unclear exactly what people are compelled to do, what people have the right to do. So it's confusing, and there's no kind of like overarching principle that applies to all cases. All these cases that have been brought up have had different kinds of arguments attached to them. So the reason for a fence to protect your property, privacy, protect against animals, to allow light to come in, whole variety of reasons, depends what the circumstance is. Okay, new Mishnah. We have a few more minutes here. I have to end at 10:20 today. The residents of a courtyard can compel each inhabitant of that courtyard to financially participate in the building of a gatehouse and a door to the jointly owned courtyard. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees and says not all courtyards require a gatehouse, and each courtyard must be considered on its own in accordance with its specific needs. Similarly, the residents of a city can compel each inhabitant of that city to contribute to the building of a wall, double doors, and a crossbar for the city. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees and says not all towns require a wall. Right? It all depends. The courtyard, it depends on on the courtyard, and the city depends on the city. With regard to this latter obligation, the Mishnah asks, how long one must live in the city to be considered like one of the people of the city, and therefore obligated to contribute to these expenses? 12 months. But if he bought himself a residence in a city, he's immediately considered like one of the people of the city. Okay? You buy property in the city, you're automatically part of the city. You live there, you're renting, you have to live there for 12 months. Okay, so here's an example of a gatehouse. The picture isn't so clear because I made it bigger. Okay. A gatehouse is a small structure built at the entrance to a courtyard, which forces people to stop before entering that area. It's generally open in front, with the gate to the courtyard forming the rear wall. If the courtyard has a guard, he often sits in a gatehouse. Okay? Gemara. The Gemara asks, is this to say that making a gatehouse is beneficial? But wasn't there that pious man with whom the prophet Elijah was accustomed to speak, who built a gatehouse, and afterward Elijah did not speak with him again? So let me just see what P means. Oh, personalities. In many places in the Talmud and Midrash, Elijah the prophet appears to people, especially to the sages, and resolves their dilemmas. As stated in 2 Kings, Elijah did not die, continues to serve as an emissary of God. On the one hand, he's the zealous angel of the covenant. On the other hand, he alleviates problems in the world. Okay, so there's a story about Elijah that he was accustomed to speak with somebody, some sage, and that sage built a gatehouse, and then Elijah didn't want to speak with him again. The objection to building of a gatehouse is that the guard who mans it prevents the poor from entering and asking for charity. Right? So so gatehouse could prevent against theft or people trespassing, but it also prevents people from walking in asking for charity for themselves. And that's something that we should be allowed to do, to let people come in to ask for charity. The Gemara answers, this is not difficult. The case presented in the Mishnah, is referring to a gatehouse built on the inside of the courtyard, in which case the poor can at least reach the courtyard's entrance and be heard inside the courtyard. The story of the pious man and Elijah, involves a gatehouse that was built on the outside of the courtyard, completely blocking the poor's access to the courtyard's entrance. And so we know that Elijah cares about the poor. There's a story I always share before we start the Ne'ilah service about Elijah being with the lepers and the wrapping of the bandages that the lepers do every day. Elijah cares about the poor, the sick, the disabled, the disadvantaged. And building a gatehouse on the outside of a courtyard means that you're preventing poor people from asking for charity. And if you wish, say instead that in both cases the gatehouse was built outside the courtyard, and yet this is still not difficult. In the one case, there's a door to the gatehouse so that the poor cannot be heard inside the courtyard, while in the other case there is no door. Or, if you wish, say that in both cases there is a door, and still this isn't difficult. In the one case, there's a key needed to open the door, and the key is not available to the poor people, whereas in the other case, there is no key needed. Or, if you wish, say that in both cases there's a key needed, and even so this isn't difficult. In the one case, the key is on the inside, so that the poor can't reach it, while in the other case of the Mishnah, the key is on the outside. And here's the key, a key from the Bar Kokhba period, of what a key to open a gate would look like. Okay, that's pretty cool that they found such a key. It's pretty intricate looking too. Okay, so what's the point of having a key if poor people if strangers have access to the key? That I don't understand, but okay. And then, okay. So now let's do this one red S paragraph. The Mishnah teaches that the residents of a courtyard can compel each inhabitant of that courtyard to financially participate in the building of a gatehouse and a door to the jointly owned courtyard. It's taught in a Braita that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says not all courtyards require a gatehouse. Rather, a courtyard that adjoins the public domain requires a gatehouse to prevent people from peering in. But a courtyard that does not adjoin the public domain does not require a gatehouse. The Gemara asks, and why don't the rabbis make this distinction? The Gemara answers, even if a courtyard does not adjoin the public domain, people in the public domain sometimes are forced toward the courtyard due to crowding in the public domain and come and enter the courtyard. So I don't know what's going on in the public domain that people would need to, you got it. Okay,
Do you know where it was?
it was right there.
I know, but I mean,
I have no idea. When I came in, I saw that it was right there.
okay, thank you
Okay,
very much.
you bet.
See you later.
Yep. Sorry about that. So the circumstances of people crowding in the public domain and then needing to seek refuge in a courtyard, I don't know what that circumstance would be. And there's no note or comment about it, and so we'll have to, I don't know. Okay, but the idea of why Shimon ben Gamliel didn't require the gatehouse in all circumstances is that not all courtyards lead from the public domain, and only those, Shimon ben Gamliel would say, would require a gatehouse. Okay, so we'll stop here for today. And so like I said at the beginning, let me know when I send the recording of this out if you're around for December 1st to have class that day. So because we don't have class next week. Okay, so have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Okay,
Take care.
you too. Thank you, Jonah.
Bye. Bye, everybody.